One of the scariest legends in Iroquois culture is the myth of the Kanontsistónties, or flying heads. These were disembodied heads with fiery eyes and long, tangled hair that floated through the air, hunting humans to eat. Because Iroquois culture dates back so far, the exact origins of the Kanontsistónties are lost to time. There are several versions of how these cannibalistic flying heads came to be. In some stories, the Kanontsistónties were created from a violent murder where the victim's severed head came back to life, grew to an enormous size, and sought revenge. Other versions say the Kanontsistónties were ancient monsters with an insatiable hunger for human flesh. One particularly haunting version of the legend says the Kanontsistónties arose from a brutal betrayal within a tribe that once lived near Sacandaga Lake in present-day New York. According to this story, a terrible famine hit the tribe. The young men suggested moving to find a new home, but the elders believed the famine and harsh winter were a curse from the Master of Life and insisted on staying put. They warned the curse would follow them if they left. This disagreement led to conflict, and the young men murdered the elders by decapitating them and throwing their heads into the lake. The elders' heads, however, came back to life. They merged into a single giant flying head with wings, talons, and covered in black hair. This monstrous head killed the young men and the rest of the tribe. The Kanontsistónties are certainly bone-chilling, but they weren't invincible. According to Seneca stories, a widow once defeated a flying head by feeding it burning coal.
The story you just heard is a basic version of the legend of Lake Sacandaga. Hi, my name is Aaron Weaver. I am the Town of Lake Pleasant historian, and this video is a history of the legend of Lake Sacandaga. The earliest known written record of the legend of Lake Sacandaga was in a book called Wild Scenes in the Forest and Prairie that was published in 1840. The author of that book was Charles Fenno Hoffman.
Charles Fenno Hoffman, 1806 to 1884. Born in New York City on February 7, 1806, the son of New York Attorney General Josiah Ogden Hoffman and Maria Fenno Hoffman, daughter of John Fenno. When 11 years old, his leg was crushed by a boating accident and had to be amputated. He attended New York University and Columbia College and studied law with Harmanus Bleecker. He was admitted to the bar in 1827, but he practiced law only intermittently. In 1833, he led a group of other students in the Euclidean Society in establishing the Knickerbocker magazine, which he edited for the first 3 issues before passing duties on to Lewis Gaylord Clark. In 1836, Park Benjamin Sr. merged his New England Monthly magazine with the American Monthly and hired Hoffman as editor, though he left to join the New York Mirror a year later. Hoffman's first book was A Winter in the Far West, 1835, recounting his travels as far west as St. Louis, Missouri. It was followed by Wild Scenes in Forest and Prairie, 1837, based on actual experiences in search of health. He wrote a successful novel, Grace Law, 1840, based on the murder of Colonel Solomon P. Sharp by Jeroboam O. Beecham, known as the Beecham-Sharp tragedy, an event that several writers, including Thomas Hawley Chivers and William Gilmore Simms, also fictionalized. Hoffman's version, however, had little in common with the true event. Hoffman's fame rested chiefly upon his poems, first collected in the Vigil of Faith, 1842. Literary critic Rufus Wilmot Griswold that year dedicated twice as much space to Hoffman than any other author in his respected anthology The Poets and Poetry of America. Griswold helped Hoffman publish The Echo, another collection of poetry, in 1844. Hoffman was also popular for his songs. From a devoutly Lutheran family, he nevertheless dealt with religious ideas in his writing from an inquisitive and open viewpoint. He became the editor of the New York Book of Poetry, which first attributed a visit from St. Nicholas to Clement Clarke Moore. Hoffman remained a successful editor and author throughout the 1840s. He officially began a new role as editor of the Literary World magazine on May 1, 1847. Under the strain of work, he went insane in 1849, supposedly after a servant used his manuscripts to start a fire. He was hospitalized briefly in April 1849, and after his release, he accepted a position with the Department of State in Washington, D.C. By autumn, however, he was declared permanently insane. He spent the last 35 years of his life in the Bloomingdale Insane Asylum, then a state asylum in Pennsylvania, and on land which later became part of Columbia University. It was at this state hospital in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, that Hoffman died on June 7, 1884.
Charles Hoffman used to visit his half-sister, Mary Calden Hoffman Rylander, at her husband's estate in the town of Lake Pleasant. Her husband, Philip Rylander Jr., had a mansion on Elm Lake, which is believed to be called at the time Kunenhráyenhnen Lake. There, Charles Hoffman met a Mohawk named Captain Gill. When he heard about this story, Charles Hoffman was probably around the age of 10 to 12 years old when his sister was still alive. Fun fact: Charles Hoffman had many siblings. One of his other half-sisters was Matilda Sarah Hoffman. She is probably the most famous of the Hoffman family. The reason is because she was the sweetheart and fiancée of Washington Irving, the man who wrote Sleepy Hollow. Located in the lower lands of the Adirondack Mountains, it was a new settlement of farms surrounded and derived by forest. Almost every building was made out of logs, and their roofs were made of wooden tiles called shingles. Almost, that is, except one. On the outlet of a lake, from which this rustic little town got its name from, was a wigwam made of bark, bent trees, woven vegetation, and animal hides. Here lived an old man full of wisdom and knowledge of the lands that surrounded him. He called himself Captain Gill. With his wife, Molly, and a daughter named Molly Jr., whom he made clear wasn't his own child, Captain Gill followed the lifestyle and traditions of his people, the Mohawks. Captain Gill was well known among the settlers of Lake Pleasant. He showed them places to catch fish and hunt deer. He shared the names of locations that his people once hunted and gathered for food. One name that is still known today is Kunenhráyenhnen River. Captain Gill guided explorers from the United States and Great Britain who were looking for adventure in the wilderness of northern New York. It is known that he guided a hunting party of the Iroquois nation from St. Regis. Captain Gill would lead groups by foot or by birch canoe through his ancestral hunting grounds. Before nightfall, the old Mohawk would invite the party around his fire and enjoy the game they had caught earlier that day. For those who enjoyed his company, it wasn't the meat that was the true treat, but the stories he told of his ancestors. It is during one of these hunting trips that Charles Hoffman learned about the legend of Lake Sacandaga from Captain Gill.
There was one old Mohawk, yclept Captain Gill, who alone kept there all year round, and was a sort of sylvan sultan of the whole region about. His daughter, Molly Gill, who led a kind of oyster-like, though no one would have mistaken her for a Prairie, in their wigwam on the outlet of Lake Pleasant, used to make his moccasins, gum the seams, sew up the ribs of his birchen canoe, and dress his venison for him, while the captain roved far and near in search of whatever might cheer the home enlivened by these two inly inmates, a tender fawn cutlet, a trinket sent by some good-natured settler to Molly, or a stoop of vile whiskey secreted in the captain's hunting pouch for his especial refreshment and delight. Wild Scenes in the Forest and Prairie, Volume 2, by Charles Fenno Hoffman.
One of Nicholas Stoner's, favorite hunting partners was the Indian, Captain Gill, who was not only a successful hunter and trapper but also brought his squaw along to do the cooking. Captain Gill knew of the fear most Indians held of his renowned companion, but felt the same as Nick did when it came to stealing from his traps or hunting in his territories. However, Captain Gill, living in his wigwam at the outlet of Lake Pleasant, enjoyed sharing his territory with Nick. Nick had learned to respect and admire the tall, stately Captain Gill both for his skill at spearing beaver in their homes and for his love and knowledge of God. Serving with the English during the American Revolution had exposed the serious-minded Indian to the Catholic beliefs, and Nick noted that he continually crossed himself when danger lurked. The Saga of Nicholas Stoner, A Tale of the Adirondacks, by Don Williams.
Kanyenke'haka. Kanyenke'haka. Kanyenke'haka.
It is mentioned in the Lake Sacandaga legend of an ancient indigenous tribe whose name has been lost in time.
The country about the headwaters of the Great Mohegan, as the Hudson is sometimes called, through abounding in game and fish, was never in recollection of the oldest Indians living, nor in that of their fathers' the permanent residents of any one tribe. From the Black Mountains Tarns, where the eastern fork takes rise, to the silver strand of Lake Pleasant, through which the western branch makes its way after rising in Sacandaga Lake, the wilderness that intervenes, and all the mountains round about the fountain heads of the great river, have from immemorial been infested by a class of beings with whom no good man would ever wish to come in contact. It was a season of great severity with that forgotten people, whose council fires were lighted on the mountain promontory that divides Sacandaga from the sister lake into which it discharges itself. Take note, a hamlet is now growing up on this beautiful mountain slope, and the scenery in the vicinity is likely to be soon better known from the late establishment of a line of post coaches between Sacandaga Lake and Saratoga Springs. Wild Scenes in the Forest and Prairie, Volume 2, by Charles Fenno Hoffman.
According to local lore, this forgotten tribe's village was located on a hill at the foot of Indian Head Mountain, behind the Hamilton County buildings in Lake Pleasant, New York. At one time, 3 individual hotels were built on the exact same location, but one burned down after the other. It was a perfect place to build a hotel because of the high location between 2 lakes, Lake Pleasant and Lake Sacandaga, not the great Sacandaga Lake Reservoir in Fulton County, New York.
Sacandaga, the lake we were on, the fountainhead of the river of that name, is shaped, as an Indian hunter phrased it, like a bear's paw spread out with an island between the ball of each toe, and the different bays and islets, resembling each other to an unpracticed eye, might, on a dark night, mislead even the skillful voyageur in making any given point on the shore, for more than one of our canoes must have coasted the greater part of it before they were all successively drawn up on the beach at the place we had fixed on for our rendezvous. Take note, it is called Round Lake by the land surveyors, probably Quasi Lucas and Company. Wild Scenes in the Forest and Prairie, Volume 2, by Charles Fenno Hoffman.
Located in the village of Speculator, which is part of the town of Lake Pleasant, is a nature trail called the Sacandaga River Community Park. Built with the knowledge of the belated Hamilton County historian Paul Wilbur, the trail talks about artifacts found within the region from an ancient people who were around before the Mohawks began hunting there.
Haudenosaunee. Haudenosaunee. Haudenosaunee.
God's weather, but this is quite a night, quote Major Jake, peering out upon the storm which was still raging an hour afterward. Yes, I may say that the flying head is abroad tonight, replied the old Mohawk in a good round English, as he lighted his pipe and looked contentedly around the bark shanty, wherein each of our company, having cheered himself with a hearty supper of dried venison, was lounging about the fire in every variety of attitude. The remark seemed to attract the attention of no one by myself, but when I asked the speaker to explain its meaning, my mongrel companions eagerly united in a request that the captain would tell them all about the varmint of which he spoke, be it panther or devil. Gill did not long hesitate to comply, but the particulars, not to mention the phraseology of his narrative, in the years that have elapsed, have almost escaped me, and I fail, therefore, in preserving the Indian character of the story while trying to recall it here. Wild Scenes in the Forest and Prairie, Volume 2, by Charles Fenno Hoffman.
When it comes to the flying head, there are many theories out there. Was it a giant bat or a giant owl? Was it a prehistoric animal from the Ice Age, not yet discovered? Was it a demon or some other spiritual entity? Was it the figment of someone's imagination? Or was it created to scare off enemy tribes from the region?
Flying heads are undead monsters from the legends of the Iroquois tribes. The flying head appears as a huge, disembodied head with fiery eyes and long, tangled hair. They fly through the air, pursuing humans to chase and devour. The origins of flying heads vary greatly from story to story. In some tales, a flying head is created from a violent murder scene. The severed head of a victim grows to enormous size, or the head emerges from a mass grave. In others, a human is transformed into a flying head after committing an act of cannibalism. In many stories, the origin of flying heads is not remarked on at all. They are primordial monsters whose nature is to eat humans, but occasionally have other motivations of their own. Flying heads are associated with whirlwinds in many Iroquois communities. NativeLanguages.org.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you wish to hear the whole story of the legend of Lake Sacandaga, there will be a link to the YouTube video below.
We don't know whether the good Captain Gill spun these yarns to keep the settlers on edge, or whether there was a kernel of truth in them, as is the case with many old legends. A hill just south of Lake Pleasant is named Indian Head. If the latter were the case, there may have been a long-standing native settlement in the area surrounding Sacandaga Lake was most likely minimal. But the legend remains, and on those foggy mornings when we look out into Sacandaga Lake and hear mysterious sounds, it is a loon? The Secret Life of a Lake by Peter Tobiasen.